Good morning, everyone. I would like to welcome you to Spinnaker's continuing webinar on demand series around organizational change management. My name is Mark Smith, and for those of you that have not participated in some of the previous webinars, I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself. I am a director in JDA's consulting practice with 20 years of supply chain management experience. Really running across a gambit of industries from retail and consumer goods to automotive and apparel and footwear, both within industry as well as from the consulting side of the house. And with significant experience within the JDA world, as well as you can see there from other consulting organizations. My key skill sets are on the demand and fulfillment and S&OP fronts, and then within the retail planning space, allocation, and to a lesser extent, merchandise and space planning. And as you will note there, some of my key accounts that I've worked on over the past 20 years or so. So that's just a little bit about me. But today, the main focus is really going to be around organizational design. Now, if you have participated already, you know that the initial Spinnaker on-demand webinar series. The first one was focused on Spinnaker's overall approach and framework to organizational change management. The next series was focused on the role of organizational alignment and readiness, and really identifying why you need to align across your organization and ensuring that your organization is ready for the change, and the role that your leadership team plays, stakeholders that you've identified, and the associated change agent network, as well as then the role that your specific locations, whether it's a corporate location or we are speaking of satellite locations or manufacturing facilities, their role in ensuring they're aligned. And if you remember within that discussion on alignment and readiness, it was really about taking the organization on that alignment journey, that alignment continuum, and taking the individuals impacted by the supply chain transformation on a journey from prepare me to help me. So taking them from that initial assessment work that is being done to that cut over and go live, and how are we going to prepare them and then get them all the way through to help me and that cut over and go live experience, which many individuals experience with any type of ERP implementation or supply chain implementation. The key focus for today, though, is going to be on organizational design. Before I actually get into the key aspects of organizational design, I want to first focus upon a brief overview of what is change management. And you can see here that for change management to be successful, you really do need to address all of these various components, from vision all the way through to leadership. All of these really make up change. Where's your leadership? What is the vision or strategy they're laying out? What is the plan that you have put in place? What resources may you need, or how might the roles and responsibilities of those resources be changing? Likewise, an area which is frequently forgotten about is from an incentive perspective. How do we incentivize the employees, and or do we need to examine how individuals' success are measured within the organization? Is the transformation journey that we're on, is it going to impact their ability to be successful? And therefore, in turn, do we need to investigate how individuals are incentivized to succeed? And which then ties in directly to the skills and whether we need to ensure there's the appropriate training with skills and that overall leadership vision. So taken holistically, all of these things are very important from a change management perspective. If there are particular areas that you are not focused upon within this change management journey, if you are not considering the skill sets of your employees and how they may need to change or evolve, or if you are not considering how they are incentivized with the new role or how the roles may be changing, or if there's not the leadership buy-in, that leads to anxiety, confusion, and frustrations with any type of transformation program that you may be putting in place. So with that said, from a Spinnaker perspective, organizational change management is a key component or a key overlay of our implementation methodology. We have our 5 lenses, so many organizations have a typical people, process, technology view of the world, because whenever you are doing any type of transformation, these are the areas that are generally impacted. Spinnaker adds 2 others, including policies and metrics. So how do our policies need to change to reflect the transformation that we are performing? Likewise, how do our metrics need to change? How do our KPIs need to change with the transformation that we're undertaking? Overlaying all of this are the typical implementation phases, as well as the programmatic view of the world. But most importantly, and this is where many transformation initiatives do fall short, is how does organizational change management play a role on this front? So with that said, Spinnaker delved further from on the OCM front, and really we developed this framework that was focused on first working with organizations to develop an appropriate OCM strategy. So what is the strategy that we want to implement for this particular transformation that your organization is going to undertake? What does that vision look like? And in turn, how does that strategy and that vision, how does it drive the scope and objectives and the associated business case for that transformation? And in order for this transformation to be successful, that strategy, that OCM strategy, then needs to delve into what are the areas in change management that we need to focus upon. And from a Spinnaker view, we've identified 4 key areas, that being organizational alignment and readiness, organizational design, training and organizational enablement, and communication. And within each of these components, there are the associated work plans and activities, various templates that we have in place, work products, metrics, and KPIs. All of these 4 OCM components can be taken individually, or they are taken holistically depending on the transformation. If it's a large-scale transformation, I cannot emphasize enough the need to really have all 4 of these components tied in with a very sound strategy and vision on the organizational change management front, which ties successfully with the transformation program that you're putting in place. For today, we are actually going to move directly into a conversation around organizational design. So again, this just highlights again the 4 different components of the Spinnaker organizational change management framework. And I want to move directly into a discussion around organizational design. What is organizational design? Really, organizational design, you can look at it from what is the overall structure, governance, culture of your organization. But then if we take it down to a more granular level, what are the roles or the job functions that support that structure and those governance or cultural norms within your organization? And in turn, what are the competencies or the skills and behaviors that are required to support these strategic business and transformational goals? So that is really what organizational design is about overall. If we then go down to aligning around the vision of organizational design, there's really 5 key areas: strategy, structure, processes, rewards, and people. With any type of supply chain transformation or any type of business transformation which your organization is undergoing, if there is large-scale change, you need to be sure that from an organizational perspective, that the design of your organization, these 5 components are taken into consideration. So the strategy being really, what are we trying to achieve and by when? And that's really where, if you remember from the discussion on organizational alignment and readiness, it is about ensuring that your leadership team is aligned around that vision. They are communicating that same vision and that same elevator pitch throughout your organization. So that is key from an overall setting the look and feel of your change management approach to the transformation that is ongoing. The next key area is around structure. So how should our organization be structured? What is an appropriate governance structure? in order to drive the business value that we think we are going to achieve from this new initiative that we are undertaking. And on this front, again, and this is really more pertinent for any type of large supply chain application implementation or any type of ERP implementation, how does the structure of our organization need to change? If you are going from, let's say, an Excel-based planning system, and so let's call that the Ford Pinto version, and you are going to some type of SAP or JDA or Oracle, and you're going full throttle with all functionality. So you're going straight from a Ford Pinto to a Rolls-Royce. How is that going to impact the structure of your organization? How do you need to examine that structure and the associated roles and responsibilities associated with that structure? Which then ties directly into processes. What technical and people processes do we need? So from a technical perspective, how do those roles need to change and evolve, and how do they do their work? How does that need to change and evolve? So again, if you're going from Excel-based planning systems to some type of application planning system, that is going to have an impact on the technology processes, technology roles and responsibilities, but likewise from a business perspective, it is going to impact what they do and how they do it. They're going to be moving away from probably more paper and email type discussions and sharing of information to a much more skilled and advanced view of the world. So how are we going to change what the business does as well and how they go about doing it? And that then leads to the last two components around people and rewards. How to ensure that from a rewards perspective, organizationally, you are designing something that works for either A, the individuals you currently have, B, the individuals that you currently have and you need to really up ramp their skill sets, or C, what type of new individuals do you need to bring into the organization to support the change that you're doing. So from an organizational design perspective, it's really understanding how do you need to change and evolve the rewards associated with these different categories of individuals, and in turn, how do you go about developing your people to have the appropriate business or technical skill sets to support the transformation that is ongoing. Overlaying all of this, or really supporting all of this structure, are those cultural behavioral norms. What drives your organization? What makes your organization tick? If I think back to a very large retailer where we were doing a very large supply chain transformation, it really meant we knew the organization was averse to change. Some individuals have been in their roles for 30, 35 years. And Excel was the best thing since sliced bread. So in order to get the organization to move along on this journey, it really meant identifying the key cultural norm within that organization was no change. How are we going to get people to change, which ties back to the previous webinar around alignment and readiness, but then how are we then going to redesign what that organization looked like? How are we going to ensure that folks that have been there for 30, 35 years still felt enabled and a positive contributing influence to the overall business, but how are we going to bring newer people along that journey and really get them to buy into the overall supply chain applications that we're implementing? So for any type of large scale or even medium scale supply chain transformation or business transformation programs, you really need to ensure that from an organizational design perspective that you're completely aligned. Alignment is really that critical component of the entire organizational design view of the world. Now, from an approach perspective, you can look at organizational design from three different aspects. You have your tactical view of the world, the strategic view, and an integrated combined view. From a tactical perspective, really organizational design work on this front is focused more around application implementations, process re-engineering, which may result in jobs being realigned, roles being realigned, and then in turn the ensuing adjustments to KPIs and metrics on the individual level. So typically speaking, most supply chain transformations are more from a tactical perspective, particularly if you're implementing any type of supply chain system. From a strategic perspective, usually that is more from if you're making changes within your business or there's a major change within a business unit. And in that sense, requiring new leadership roles or new changes as to how your business units may work, that's really more of a strategic view of the world, and it's not really impacting per se how things may occur at the operational level. It's more impacting how things are viewed at strategically and how you may want to be aligning different business units across your organization. If we were to look at it from let's call it an implementation view of the world and differentiate between tactical versus strategic, tactical organizational design work is really focused more upon implementations, upgrades, which then impact roles and responsibilities and may require some type of center of excellence to be created, some type of supply chain center of excellence. Strategic, on the other hand, can usually be viewed more from a strategic road mapping perspective. What does that 5-year plan look like? What systems do we want to implement or change over the next 5 years? And that can be viewed more from a strategic organizational design perspective, where if you're identifying in year 4 you want to implement some type of a new retail planning supply chain system, what might that mean in year 4 from an organizational design perspective? Do I need to realign how my planners may work? So that's how you can view things from a strategic perspective. The last aspect around organizational design is what we at Spinnaker term an integrated or combined view of organizational design. And this is really where you are looking at mergers and acquisitions or any extremely large business change. And this is where you are doing a wholesale strategic shift. So if you think about how IBM went from a computer company to more of a consulting-based organization, that was an integrated, combined organizational design change where from a complete top-down, bottoms-up perspective, IBM needed to reinvent themselves and the type of resources that they needed. This type of organizational design work is relatively rare. Usually from a supply chain perspective, we are talking a more tactical view of the world, and at times a strategic view of the world. Now, what I want to discuss next are various dimensions associated with organizational design work. And there are really 5 key areas here. There is the assessment and strategy work, operating model, the macro organizational model, the micro model, and then role definition and assignment. And typically within the supply chain arena, most areas from a dimension perspective focus upon macro, micro, and role definition and assignment. And what I want to do is, and well, before I move on to the next slide, for assessment and strategy and operating models, so the first 2 dimensions, they're really more, as I mentioned, typically focused on, as I mentioned on the previous slide, more around mergers and acquisitions or divestitures or acquisitions, things along that line. So they are a much more strategic and a much more complicated view of change and how your organization may be changing and evolving. If we look at really the 3 key areas from a dimensions perspective on the organizational design front, the first large area where supply chain transformations or business transformations are impacted are on the macro organizational front. So on this area, the macro front is really around how are your processes changing, and how might those process changes then impact cross-functional touch points or your teams working together. So in the particular example here, how might your purchase plan creation, how might that inform or impact the acquisition of your raw materials because you have changed systems or you have changed your processes. So at a macro view of the world, what does this really mean? And from an organizational design perspective, this is an area where there probably needs to be some type of consideration from a RACI perspective. So how are you going to redefine those roles and responsibilities and who is accountable? And in turn, if you're looking at the roles and responsibilities and that accountability, it may also mean what does that overall governance mean for that particular group now? Do you need to change the governance of the group or the structure of the group and or the actual functional definitions of the group? So as you go from a macro view of the world to then a micro view of the world, on this particular front, you are then moving from going down from a higher level to the actual core competencies associated with individuals within your group. So as you continue to expand and roll out any type of transformation perspective from a micro view, organizationally speaking, what does this mean to individuals? And by individuals, I'm referring to what does it mean for their KPIs? What does it mean for their skill set? What does it mean for their core competencies? How do we need to validate that they are performing well in their roles? So as you move through a supply chain transformation or a business transformation, you first need to look at from a macro perspective how the organization needs to change and evolve. Then you need to move that into a micro view of the world. How do I need to ensure that the KPIs and how individuals are rewarded, how that then may change? The last key component on a dimensions front from an organizational design perspective is associated with role definition and assignment. Now, this is an area where you get down to the nuts and bolts, so to speak, where as an organization you are changing and you are now working with your HR partners to create and update job descriptions. So if I go back to the earlier example of a large retailer implementing change, this was an area where we were facing a situation of individuals actually having their roles and jobs completely change. And at first, the organization was not sure if they needed to completely realign particular positions, if they needed to create new groups of roles and whatnot. So this is where then from an implementation perspective, we started to work with the organization around assessing the associated role definition for all of the new roles that were going to be created. We reviewed all of the roles that were already in existence and how that may or may not have needed to change, and really worked with the HR team to come up with what that new view of the world was, at least from a supply chain perspective, and drove that through to an overall implementation view of the world. So from a micro perspective, it is really, as I mentioned, it is about that governance and KPIs, and then moving on to the role and definition and focus upon how we may need to change and evolve job descriptions, how we may need to change how our groups work together and or what those groups look like. So from an overall organizational design, role definition and assignment, as you've gone through this continuum, it's really about leading to that ultimate implementation of the new processes or the new systems and measuring the success of those processes and systems. And associated with that are the influencers, where we investigate what do those new stretch goals or reward systems need to look like. From an individual or an organizational perspective, what learning methodologies do we need? And if you're a large enough organization, what are the LMS or the learning management systems that you have in place? How do those need to change and evolve to support this new organizational design that you're coming out with? And in turn, that then automatically ties to continuous process improvement and the associated benefits tracking. So from an overall organizational design view of the world, and these 5 dimensions, it's really critical from a supply chain slash business transformation perspective that first you're looking at things from that macro view of the world and understanding how roles and responsibilities may be changing, what those new functional definitions may be in the future, then driving that down towards the micro view and how you need to investigate roles, what is the appropriate size of the organization, the associated KPIs, which then drives down into the detailed role definition and working with your HR partners to make sure that you have the roles well defined or you develop the new roles necessary, and in turn you associate it and create reward systems that reward individuals for how things have changed and evolved in the organization. The last area within organizational that I would touch upon is really the complexity associated with any type of change that you're implementing. And really, there's two key components associated with. There's the degree of change and the ease of implementation. And you can look at this from process design work versus, let's say, some type of merger and acquisition or post-merger integration. From a degree of change or ease of implementation, generally speaking, roles and responsibilities or some type of process reengineering. It's fairly simple to do, and it's not necessarily a lot of change. If you're talking about implementing a new system and the associated process changes that you may need to go through, then you are moving along that continuum where it is becoming a more complex implementation and therefore more complex discussions around organizational change management and organizational design. And in turn, it could be a much larger degree of change because you're involving many more business units. A different way to look at the complexity associated with organizational design is if you have made a decision to implement a new system, so about dead center there on the graphic, new systems implementations, are you implementing all business units or have you decided to go with one business unit? So if you have decided to take an approach of one business unit, this new systems implementation that you're doing may be not quite as complex and the degree of change may be less, and you are going to learn from that initial business unit implementation and learn from it and build upon it, and you are sort of mitigating the difficulty of any organizational design work that you may have to do. If the decision was made to go more big bang approach and implement all business units at the same time, then you are talking much more complex overall. And likewise, if you're talking a complete mergers and acquisition or some type of post-merger integration work, you're talking a very complex and a very strategic view of what's going to be happening. So this is, generally speaking, when you hear of large organizations that have divested of a particular business unit and individuals being let go, these are the type of organizational design where there are teams and teams of organizational change management professionals that focus on these particular topics. So with that, today I have taken you through Spinnaker's view of organizational design. We have had a discussion around really how you align the organizational design vision and the 5 key areas around strategy, structure, process, rewards, and people that you need to consider with any type of organizational design. And then we moved into a discussion of 5 dimensions associated with organizational design work, and typically macro, micro, and role definition assignment being key dimensions associated with any type of supply chain or business transformation work that is ongoing. And then we have wrapped up with a discussion around complexity of organizational design work. So with that, we have now completed webinars series on Spinnaker's Change Management Introduction and Framework. We have had a discussion around alignment and readiness on the organizational front and organizational design. The next 2 Spinnaker on-demand webinar series will now focus on training and organizational enablement and communication. If there are any questions, please reach out. Spinnaker is more than happy to address any questions you may have. and I would like to thank everybody for listening today. Thank you.